Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the All Things Policy podcast. I, Arindam Goswami, am your host for today. I work as a research analyst at the Takshashila Institution in the High-Tech Geopolitics program. Recent unrest in Iran, including protests and potential regime instability, disrupts India's strategic interests like the Chabahar port access, energy routes, among many other things, while also reshaping alliances in the Middle East and beyond. Emerging groupings such as a weakened Iran boosting Pakistan-China ties or Sunni states hedging against a post-Khamenei vacuum. All of these create ripple effects for India's multi-alignment policy. However, when we talk about Iran today, the conversation usually starts with missiles, sanctions, or nuclear timelines, but that framing misses the bigger story. What's really unfolding is something far more consequential, the slow breakdown of how power, alliances, and rules actually work in the world. For India, this isn't a distant West Asian crisis. It touches our energy security, our diaspora, our connectivity ambitions like Chabahar, and more importantly, it tests the idea that countries like India can stay strategically autonomous in a world that's fragmenting into overlapping, informal, and often contradictory groupings. We are no longer living in a clean Cold War of two blocks. Instead, we have shifting coalitions, selective partnerships, and crises that are never fully resolved, only managed. So today we are not asking what Iran did last week. No, we are asking a harder question. What does the Iran crisis reveal about the kind of world we are entering, and where does India actually stand in it? And to discuss all of this today, I have as my guest Yusuf Unjhawala, a mechanical engineer by qualification and a businessman by profession. Yusuf is an adjunct scholar at Takshashila. He has a keen interest in defense, geopolitics, and strategic affairs, and I'm sure he'll have a lot to offer on these important questions of today. So, yeah, Yusuf, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Arindam. Been a while since we last spoke.
Yeah. So let's jump in. Just for the sake of our listeners, could we maybe start with a brief background of how the pieces were set in Iran before these protests broke out? Which country was aligned with whom? Which country was aligned with which section within Iran, etc.? Who's ruling in Iran behind the curtains and openly, publicly? And then if you could talk about how the current protests have panned out from whatever information is available publicly.
That's a lot to unpack in one question. So, who was aligned with who? Let's see what Iran was doing. And we'll go back pre-October 7 attack on Israel. Iran formed this axis of resistance where it used all these proxies, Hezbollah based in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen. And this is how this was its arm to control the region at which that was how it was deterring some of the other countries from taking action which is not in Iran's interest. October 7 happened and Israel went after Hamas in Gaza and has decimated Hamas to a large extent, although we have seen from some of the footage which has come out when hostages were exchanged, how they came out in force all of a sudden with the guns out and stuff like that. So we don't know the true situation of where Hamas stands at this point in time. But largely Hamas was degraded. Similarly, Hezbollah, which was a much more powerful group in Lebanon, got targeted by Israel, the very famous pager attack which was conducted, taking out a lot of Hezbollah personnel, terrorists, militants. I mean, depends on which world, who sees how. And those guys got taken out, and Israel conducted certain targeted attacks at its leadership. Hassan Nasrallah was killed, and even the successor of his was killed. And since the entire leadership was taken out, Hezbollah got weakened very drastically. So Iran lost two of its critical arms in the region, with which it controlled a lot of the play in West Asia. And then last year, Israel and Iran fought the war, something which was seen as inconceivable at one time, did happen. And Israel bombed Iran. Iran took retaliatory steps and fired missiles at Israel. A lot of those were defended along with the US, but many hit. And finally, it culminated with the strikes by the US on the nuclear facilities of Iran, and the war ended. But Iran was left severely weakened by in that war. And I remember at that time I had written that this will weaken the regime because it has failed to defend itself. That is what it will be in the eyes of the people over there. It has lost its major proxies in the region. So this was waiting to happen, I would say, because the regime was already weakened. So it needed a spark, and that spark came when the bazaris, the merchants of Tehran, went out to protest, the depreciating currency, the rising input costs, the inflation, and all hell broke loose. And we saw what happened next. There were large-scale protests. Government buildings were set on fire, and then the regime cracked down, killing several thousand people by its own admission, several thousand people. So this is what happened. The other alliances, if you see that, are very recent one is the Saudi-Pakistan Pact Defense Mutual Defense Agreement, which is very recent. And prior to what happened in Iran very recently, it just happened a couple of months ago. If you remember, there was an I2U2 West Asia Quad, which was formed a few years back, which has I2 is India and Israel, and U2 is UAE and USA. This, and then we had this whole IMEC concept come up, which was to connect India to Europe via West Asia. So this was what was happening, and probably the October 7 attack was to disrupt this IMEC from going forward, because it involved all the West Asian Arab countries, including UAE, Saudi Arabia. Very recently, what we have seen is the Saudi-UAE ties have soured, and they are at their lowest in a very long time, if ever. I think it's lowest ever. And this is another situation which is growing up in that region. So amidst all this, we have this uprising, and you ask who's the ruler over there? It's Khamenei, the supreme leader, who calls the shot. He appoints all the clergy, appoints the IRGC guards, and there is a rotation system over there where he makes sure nobody gets too powerful. And he obviously has his handpicked few people, his chosen few, who is sure will follow his orders. And that is how, several thousand people were killed. From the reports or from the posts on social media, I've seen machine guns out there, truck-mounted machine guns, live ammunition. We heard machine gun fire, automatic rifle fire was heard in some of the videos, and which then really indicates, how so many thousand people were killed because they were firing on their own people. And this regime stands further weakened, although it has managed to suppress this current uprising. I don't think it may be the end of it, because Iran has several hundred people in custody, many of whom have been sentenced to death. And very recent statements indicate that Iran will follow through with those orders to execute these people. And if that happens, then there may be another round of uprising, and perhaps that would also be a trigger for Trump to carry out strikes in Iran, which he held back. He was where we thought that last Wednesday the strikes were imminent, but then he held back because Iran said they are not going to execute for now, and they said they are not. The killings had stopped, but by then they had already killed several thousand people. People were afraid to go out because there were so many deaths in that phase. So this is where things stand. This thing, I don't think the uprising is over. It depends on how the regime handles it. And so far, it is showing a very, very aggressive stance against the protesters, who they call terrorists, foreign-backed, which means Israeli and US-backed seditionists. And they have said that they are not going to leave them. They are going to be punished.
Right, right. So a lot of factors seem to be behind the current uprising. You talked about the Israel-Iran conflict, US also attacking. Then there was the immediate trigger of the economic issues, right? So the reason I'm exploring these reasons is just to explore the meta question of whether this Iran crisis is less about Iran itself and more about whether the post 1945 international system still has enforcement power. And when I say why I'm talking in these terms, more often than not, the discourse frames Iran as the regional troublemaker. But I just wanted to explore whether that framing is wrong, and whether we should also look at this as a case study of institutional erosion, right? When it comes to UN paralysis, the UN not working in this conflict's case, there's also sanctions fatigue, and is there also some sort of selective rule enforcement by these great powers? So how do you look at this from this perspective?
See, what you've said is all right in its own place, in isolation. I mean, we know the UN has failed to prevent any war. The great powers have gone and done things, right? The US and the Soviet Union in their times went and invaded countries, they attacked, bombed countries, and nothing could be done about it. The hypocrisy, again, we know it's rife, and in global affairs, hypocrisy is the norm. It's nothing to be surprised about. So I don't think it is related to that. In this case, there's an uprising. It is nothing to do with for some of the other things that you said. These are things that have been there for decades now. There is no country which can stop internal conflicts from happening. I mean, we saw the massive genocide in Rwanda. It couldn't be stopped. Nobody stopped it. I mean, we know the institutions have never worked. Even in countries where the great powers were not involved, we failed. The international community failed to stop genocide in Rwanda. Similarly, in Sudan, so yes, the institutions have failed, but I don't think it's to link up to say that the institutional failure has caused uprising in Iran. Iranians have been rising against the Islamic regime ever since they came to power. This is not the first time they went against them. They have risen against them. One was just very recently, a couple of years back, when with the death of a woman in Iran who refused to wear the hijab, and that went into women life freedom movement, and that was also mercilessly crushed by Iran. Before that, uh, there was one in 2019, 2017. So these protests against the regime have been happening. This is by far the largest, and the consequences, the way the regime has come down on them, killing several thousand people. Some estimates say between 12 to 20,000 people dead. This is a very, very huge toll, and I think the regime is going to struggle to recover from this.
Is there some sort of sanctions fatigue also, especially when it comes to the nuclear facilities, etc. Right? So, is there ambiguity on that front? Has that led to more of sanctions fatigue? There's the recent announcement by Trump of more tariffs when it comes to countries dealing with Iran, etc. Right? So, is there some sort of sanctions fatigue also here, which is probably behind, which is maybe one of the stressors in this problem?
Look, the sanctions have not worked against any countries, right? It has only ended up, say, uh, targeting the people rather than the regime. So similarly, in the case of Iran, the sanctions have hurt the people of Iran rather than the regime. The regime has consolidated its position over the years. It has pursued the bomb, kept it ambiguous. Perhaps if it had weaponized, then it might be in a different place today, just like how North Korea did. But no amount of sanctions prevented North Korea from building its bomb. Uh, Russia sanctions has not stopped the war. Sanctions against India in the 1990s, 80s, and 90s over its missile and nuclear weapons program did not stop India. So sanctions have never worked. Uh, when there is a focused effort in certain regard by a regime which controls the state in every possible way, like Iran does, like North Korea does, like Russia does, then they will go around achieving those objectives. Sanctions will not work. They just generally now have not worked.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a good point. Now, okay, now moving to another meta question, I just wanted to explore the idea of whether we are seeing the return of civilizational geopolitics in West Asia, where identity blocks matter more than alliances on paper. I just wanted to explore this from the Sunni Shia perspective. Those might be cliches, but I just wanted to explore how culture, history, and grievance narratives are probably now driving alignments more than formal treaties.
There are two. If you just look at it, there is the Shia Sunni divide, and there is also the Arab Persian divide. The civilization divide is more on the Arab Persian lines rather than the Shia Sunni divide. That's a sectarian divide which exists, but that has not stopped from certain alliances between Iran and its and Sunni regional actors. For instance, Hamas is a Sunni organization, Palestinians are Sunnis. It has good ties with Qatar, again a Sunni Arab state. At one time, it had good connect with even Turkey. I think it still remains there. But although now with this Turkey, Saudi, and Pakistan alliance, which is building up, it's going to kind of be in bracket as a Shia Sunni kind of a thing. Although they are projecting that as a Muslim NATO or Islamic NATO. It will be seen in a sectarian light, especially if Iran is not included in this one, and I don't think it will be included. So these are, and also there are inter-Arab rivalries. The relation between Saudi and UAE on one side and Qatar on the other side were not good. I mean, for a long time it was strained. They imposed sanctions on Qatar, and until it was finally, they came together. Very most recently, there has been a fallout between with Saudi Arabia and UAE. These were two. We thought that they were joined at the hip, but we've seen that there is a fallout over there. Nothing is certain in West Asia. There are a lot of power plays. Qatar punches above its weight. UAE is now trying to do the same, where it's trying to punch above its weight and expand its influence, not only in West Asia, but also in Africa. I mean, seen what's happening in Sudan, in Somaliland and Somalia. Israel recognized Somaliland. Saudi is on the other spectrum, opposing what UAE is doing over there, because UAE has a port access in Somaliland, and very recently, just after Israel recognized Somaliland, it recognized the passport of Somaliland while issuing visas. No formal recognition for Somaliland, but this has happened, that it has, issuing visas to Somaliland passport. So there are a lot of these regional, and Turkey obviously has its own ambition as a middle power over there, and with a very, very strong military abilities. It has also a very good domestic industrial setup, which is churning out drones, fighter aircraft, warships. They have considerable military might in that region. So there are various actors. Either their interests converge in some areas, they diverge in some areas. It's a very complex region over there.
Right, right. So this seems to be a sort of a new grouping problem, right? These seem to be blocks without rules, probably. So I just wanted to talk about what's more dangerous today, the earlier rigid Cold War style blocks, or today's loose overlapping groupings like BRICS plus SCO, I2U2, or any of these ad hoc Middle East coalitions, right? Do these fluid alliances create ambiguity, some sort of miscalculation? It also carries escalation risks, right? Especially around Iran. So do you think this is more dangerous today?
In the global scenario, a lot of things is happening. But if you're just looking at Iran, I don't think there is that kind of a grouping right now. Iran, first of all, is very weakened. In fact, if you look at some of the reporting, very paradoxically, if you say, those who prevented from carrying out strikes are who you'd call traditional adversaries of Iran. Israel pressed on Trump to not attack. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, all of these countries reached out to Trump and asked Trump to hold back and not attack Iran. So it's paradoxical, because you would think that these guys would benefit most from Iran getting further weakened, but they understand that a vacuum, especially a strike on the leadership, which takes out the leadership out, and a vacuum that follows, may not be good for the region and these countries. Even though this Iran has always traditionally been an adversarial state, so it's very difficult to say, what is happening, who's plotting against who. But this is a very big indicator as to these powers prevailed over Trump to hold back. It may not last. Trump might eventually conduct strikes. A carrier group is already reached. It was redeployed from the South China Sea to West Asia. Probably another carrier is on its way. They have not disclosed it, but it's said, social media or open source intelligence says that carrier is also moving towards West Asia. A lot of other cargo flights have happened, which probably indicates ammunition and all kinds of other equipment required to conduct strikes. Those are on the way. Fighter aircraft have been repositioned. So it's not over yet in Iran.
Right. And considering that Iran is still held on in some ways, is Iran exploiting the ambiguity of multi-alignment in a good manner? Or is that ambiguity itself becoming a liability now for, say, mid-sized powers? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. I just wanted to talk about India's Iran dilemma also, right? In terms of strategic autonomy versus strategic isolation. So, I mean, for example, if the Gulf becomes polarized into security blocks, does India then risk becoming an outsider with interests probably, but no influence as such? Just wanted to challenge the assumption that, having a diaspora out there or even trade, that automatically translates into geopolitical leverage. In that sense, all of these aspects from the Chabahar port, energy security, Israel ties, US pressure, all of this is becomes very important for India too. But has India then quietly downgraded Iran from maybe a strategic partner to a tactical inconvenience, right? Especially since India-US ties have sort of had started to deepen, etc. Right? So, how do you look at India's Iran dilemma from that perspective?
Uh, I think another dilemma that is building up for India is Saudi UAE ties. You have to see that the Saudis have a defense agreement with Pakistan, which and probably Turkey is going to join soon. The draft is ready. That's what the reports indicate. This is going to be one axis, and with UAE Saudi relations not good, UAE is not going to join that pact. And as we speak, we had the president of UAE in India on a very short visit. Less than 2 hours over here and back. That indicates there are serious tensions over there, and he had come to confer with Modi. We don't know what's happened. Now, I'm sure they're not going to tell us what they spoke about. They're obviously going to talk about the larger bilateral ties between the two countries, but I'm sure there was something very urgent to talk about, which indicates the seriousness of the differences between Saudi and UAE. So this is going to take us again to another kind of a balancing act that we have been doing in West Asia for a very long time.
So, can India do anything more than just carrying out a balancing act? Do we have any sort of influence out there to shape the happenings in that area, or are we just an observer with interests? Obviously, we want peace and security everywhere, but should India take some proactive steps to intervene in this conflicts, or is it better to just stay back, stay out of these issues, and see what happens?
Now, let me go back to your previous question again. You talked about multi-alignment and how it's going to work, or constraints of choices. With a great power competition back, multi-alignment is going to be tested because the US is going unilateral in every which way it can and imposing. Trump is using the tariff way to countries to bend to its will. India has not so far when it comes to its purchases from Russia, which is one of the pet peeves of Trump. Although that's only a fake, we know it. It was about the Nobel Prize, and also the other one is agriculture. But again, more of this was solvable. We were nearly there to get the deal done, but it was some of the other things which was on Trump's mind, which prevented deal from happening, and 50% tariff came in. But if you look at now the latest threat of 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran, that again constrains our choices. So we're going to face this issue in multiple spheres with this geopolitical contestation between US and China. So multi-alignment as a concept, I mean, although we like to say that we want this, I think is going to be tested and stretched, because even between these blocks, I mean, even you mentioned BRICS, I would say that India's interests are not aligned in some of the things BRICS is doing. It's against our interests. For instance, South Africa very recently called a naval exercise between itself, Iran, Russia, and China as a BRICS plus exercise. I mean, that's not how it should be. South Africa went in a very unilateral way to pronounce this as BRICS plus. China did not oppose, Russia did not oppose. Iran will discount its opinion over here, but Russia and China did not oppose. And the US has been targeting BRICS for a long time now under Trump. So this framing as a BRICS plus X naval exercise sends a very negative message to some of our other partners, which is US and probably even the Western alliance as a whole, although that alliance is now failing, but the West as a whole. Japan has a problem with China. South Korea has a problem with China. Some of the ASEAN countries have a problem with China. So when you frame it this way as a BRICS plus exercise, then this whole concept of multi-alignment and being part of multiple groups on certain issues, well, then there will be other issues which will be very detrimental to our interests, and all this balancing is not going to work out, especially with someone like Trump over there who says he's going to charge tariffs for being part of BRICS, or probably we don't know what else it might do. And then overall, you'll not be able to have a stable relationship, where you'll not be able to cut a trade deal at all, because once a trade deal is signed, tomorrow Trump might just say, you know what, you're doing business with China, I'm going to put this tariff. You're doing business with this person, I'm going to put 10% tariff on this one. Or you're doing that, I'm going to add tariff. So the deal, whatever deal you do, is not going to be worth the paper it's signed on. So this is going to constrain India's multi-alignment, being in multiple groups of contrarian interests. So this is how it is, and it's increasingly going to be so.
Right. And apart from multilateral, partnerships, etc., does India have a direct role, or not direct role, but does it benefit India to more proactively intervene in this? Say, for example, if Iran or the ISGC fragments into warlord fiefdoms, right? So, does it help India's interests to nurture, say, secular exile networks, to shape a pro-India successor state, etc., right? Or like, do we want it to be a multipolar twist? In a multipolar twist, would we want India to quietly back maybe a BRICS mediated Iran mediation to somehow maybe dilute US Saudi grouping, etc.? So I'm just talking loudly here. Are there any proactive steps that India can take apart from being part of multilateral partnerships, etc.? Are there any other steps that India should take?
This, what you talk about, is an internal situation in Iran, which we have absolutely no control over, and I don't think we can shape it. It's not a war between two countries which India can then probably offer its good offices and mediate. That opportunity was available when, for instance, between Ukraine and Russia, because we had good relations with both sides. We had an opportunity to mediate between Iran and Israel, for example. We had an opportunity to mediate between Iran and US, going back several years. Now, I mean, the relations are fraught. But those were the opportunities. But there is nothing that we can do to shape what is happening inside Iran. I don't think any country can influence that. Obviously, some external forces, some external elements, like for instance, Israel and US may have a vested interest in shaping the outcome, and perhaps they have, being in the region, Israel has more of a both skin in the game, as well as some of its resources deployed out there, which it has over several years to degrade Iranian regime, its capacity. We saw what it did when it attacked several of its leaders from inside Iran, from using drones which were already pre-positioned inside. So that shows the amount of the extent of their penetration inside Iran. Those countries would have a way in shaping, probably instigating, but not completely shape what happens over there. I think the people of Iran are going to decide that, and at the moment they have taken a big hit with several thousands, killed. But I don't think anybody else is going to ultimately overthrow the regime. It's going to be the people of Iran.
Right. And coming to our neighboring country, Pakistan, does Pakistan have any leverage in this ongoing Iran crisis? And if yes, then should India exploit the Pakistan-Iran maybe border frictions or some such destabilized Iran in the future to somehow maybe encircle Pakistan, and just to prevent a destabilized Iran from inadvertently crowning Pakistan as the Gulf's new Sunni fulcrum, etc. Right? Do we want to quote some other countries in the Middle East as counterweight? So, are there any such tactics or strategies that you see India adopting just when it comes to Pakistan and its leverage?
No, look, I think what can happen is very immediate, where if the US decides to strike Iran, then it might use Pakistani bases. Now, will Pakistan allow it? Well, I don't think they're going to say no to Trump. So that might increase Pakistan's, already risen stature in Trump's eyes. But it's not, in the long term, I don't think it's going to help Pakistan in any way in its relations with Iran. Ultimately, Iran is a Shia state. Pakistan is a Sunni majority state. And that frictions will not go away. I mean, even now, we've seen over the last year, they traded missiles at each other. So that is not going to go away. What do we do to counterweight? I mean, we use the Chabahar port to have kind of access to Afghanistan, to bypass Pakistan, and also have some kind of a strategic stake over there using that port. But very recent reports say that India probably has transferred the committed amount to Iran and exited from the management of the port. Although we may still be able to access the port, but we have gone away from managing the port. And that goes back to your previous question, that have we downgraded Iran regime? Possibly. I think we may assume that this regime is not worth investing in anymore till there is some time, there's some kind of a stability, in that country. Right now, it's very unstable, I would say, and the regime perhaps may not last too long.
Right, and yeah, as you mentioned, we have sort of moved away from the Chabahar port management or day-to-day management, etc. But is the Iran crisis actually shifting the center of gravity back to West Asia from the Indo-Pacific, which was in the discussions in the past few years or decades, maybe? Is it going to force India to fight on two strategic fronts? I mean, just wanted to counter the dominant narrative that the Indo-Pacific is the only theater that matters.
No, I mean, look, the larger contestation is in the Indo-Pacific. It is not the same as what is happening in West Asia. I don't think India is getting a two-front situation from the West Asian bloc. I mean, our two-front situation is only Pakistan and China. So there's no such regard. West Asia has always been in turmoil. I mean, last 70 years history has bears that fact, right? There's never been a dull moment in West Asia. Things always happen.
Right. Are we moving towards a world of permanent managed instability where crises like Iran and others are never solved? Right. It seems like they're only contained to again into fester maybe and then emerge again sometime later. And is India really prepared for that kind of world? And the reason I'm asking is who benefits from this sort of ambiguity, from this sort of instability, and what assumptions is India making that could fail, that could cost it later on? What could such a miscalculation look like?
The miscalculation is going to be in terms of okay, with the rules-based order that was talked about, which never existed in real terms in terms of how the great powers acted, but in generally there was some sanctity to sovereignty, territorial integrity. Now it's all that has collapsed. There are multiple wars over territory. The US itself is coveting Greenland. Trump has called Canada its 51st state. So all that has collapsed. The real threat, I would say, which lies is number of regional wars that can happen over ambitions of regional actors. So potentially, you may not have a global war of the last century, which like World War One and Two, where there were two definitive blocks, but you may end up a number of countries going to war against each other for their strategic objectives. And this phase seems to be opportune where nobody is underwriting global security. The norms have fallen. So, China would think that it can take Taiwan at this point in time. Russia has already invaded Ukraine and trying to get a lot of its territory. The US is looking at expanding its territory. We don't know who's doing next. These because nobody's going to stop it. There are earlier the UN would get into and at least impose sanctions on some of the smaller countries from fighting wars. But even that is not going to happen anymore. We are in a very different time, and this is the risk that it carries. India could get involved in a war, although we would like to stay away from any war. But we don't know if war is imposed on us. We may have to fight. It's a very risky situation in the world right now, and miscalculations could trigger. Miscalculations can happen when countries assume that this is their moment and they may be able to pull something off. Russia tried that in Ukraine and failed. Similarly, there may be other countries who think that we may try something and achieve certain objectives, and that could lead to a miscalculation, then get into a larger war.
Right. And I was just wondering about the realignments that were probably being discussed maybe a few months ago and now after the Iranian revolution here. So, for example, the US strikes on Iran, the Israel strikes on Iran, were they sort of accelerating a Gulf NATO, so as to say, maybe excluding Turkey, etc. And could that have pressured India to pick sides between Tel Aviv and a nuclear threshold Tehran? But these current, recent, happenings in Iran sort of deflate that possibility, maybe?
There was no West Asia NATO happening. I mean, what we are seeing right now is a pretty much a Sunni NATO likely to take shape, and it's not going to be having all the Sunni states. We don't know how that is going to play out. I don't think you can ever have these certainties about West Asia. I don't think Israel will allow this Sunni NATO to come up. Right? I mean, they may not be able to control it, but then it will test it. Pakistan may be emboldened by this alliance and try and adventure against India, and that alliance will again get tested. So these are a lot of things that are happening. We can't say anything for certain.
Right. And just to poke at the China question here, China also doesn't seem to be taking any sort of hard positions here or, clear positions here. So what do you think is going on in their minds?
The Chinese generally they don't interfere in internal affairs. That's what they say. Every country has its own problem to manage, and it does not interfere. But what has also happened is it shows the limitations of China in terms of its power. It does not have the power like the US wields to influence other countries' affairs or even strike at will at countries which it wants to, if it doesn't like. For instance, like how the US does, how the US went and bombed the nuclear facilities in Iran. So there are limits to China's power. It's not a US yet, although it has technical capabilities now. It's ramping up its armed forces. It's the second highest defense budget in the world. Its nuclear capabilities are expanding. Its naval capabilities are expanding, but still it does not have the kind of capabilities that the US has.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Yusuf. This was a wonderful and insightful discussion. Any parting thoughts that you have on this crisis and how it could unfold and what India should probably do?
India is going to be in a wait and watch mode. I don't think we can do much about what's happening in Iran. We have not issued any statement. It doesn't make any sense for us to issue any statement. So it's going to be wait and watch. How it's going to pan out? I'd say we might see a strike on Iran sooner or rather than later, and the regime, which is already very weakened, possibly may get thrown out. We don't know. I mean, it happened in Syria very recently. It may happen in Iran.
Right. Thanks, Yusuf. Thanks for joining us today. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Arindam. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.